Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. You can find us on Facebook. Just look for The Writer's Dream. If you want to be on the show or you have a question for me, please message me through that Facebook page. We are also on YouTube. You have to search my name, Linda Maria Frank. I'm the author of Annie Tillery Mysteries. And we are also here at LTV, so if you go on ltv-eh.org and go on video on demand, you can find the show and you can find the episodes that we have. We have about 150 interviews now, so if you are a reader or a writer and you're interested in reading and writing, you can find some good local authors and some tips about writing. Today, our host is Jack Bolello, our very own Jack Bolello, and our guest is Fred Ford, and his book is The World Premiere of Me. So take it away, Jack.
Well, thank you, Linda, and I'm delighted to be here because I know Fred, and I've talked to him over the years, and I've always been impressed with, he's a man for all seasons, a Renaissance man. He is not only a novelist, but he's a screenwriter, he's a musician, and believe it or not, a stand-up comic as well as a former stand-up comic, but and a couple of other things. But I'd like to start by using a couple of quotes that I've always been impressed with. One is an ancient Roman quote that a world without literature is a dead world. And the other, because it's sprinkled very nicely and appropriately throughout your book, is the music references that you make. And believe it or not, Nietzsche, the German philosopher, once said, a world without music would be a mistake. So I wanted to start by using one of the songs that you highlight in your book, Sinatra's, the way you look tonight, which was one of my all-time favorites. But it's really, it just grabbed me and it captured me in that moment of time. But you start off by saying that writing is a solitary endeavor. Can you kind of expand on that, Fred? Because I agree with you. And what did you mean by that?
You know, the most difficult part for me as a writer is writing, just sitting down to do the work. There's endless opportunities to just cash it in, to say, who's going to read a book by me? Where am I going to find the time? And then you sit down, and invariably, at least for me, it's all lousy. It's not coming out right. It's doing. What I eventually realized is that the work has got to be, you alone as the writer have got to sit down and put glue on your seat and crank out the material no matter how bad it is, because books get rewritten. They don't get written. You know, the book will come if you will spend the time, the solitary time, by yourself with your thoughts, with the ideas that are flowing into and through you onto the screen. If you'll just commit to do that work, it's lonely work, it's solitary work, but eventually you're joined by your characters. Your characters start speaking, the story opens up, ideas start flowing. It becomes less solitary, but nevertheless, it is a solitary endeavor, and it is day upon day upon day upon day. If you're a writer, especially a first-time writer, you have to be willing to go years sometimes without a paycheck, without a published book. And that requires a lot of intestinal fortitude. It takes a commitment. And commitment is 100%. There's no such thing as partly committed. Yeah. So it's a solitary endeavor from start to finish. You get to celebrate with people when your book is done, but that's what I meant by that.
Yeah, very good. I also found it to be an existential experience because there's no guarantee of a payoff here. There's no promise of reward or success. And the real reward is in the activity and the endeavor and your ability to finally follow through and complete the task without any, as I said, guarantee that it's going to be a bestseller or you're going to become a success in that regard.
I think in that regard, it's a different thing altogether. There's writing and then there's marketing. They're two different things. You can write a great book and no one will read it if you don't get out there and promote it, if you don't find a way to publicize it, if you don't find a way to get onto social media, if you don't do stuff like this, which I love to do, so that's not a problem for me. But marketing is the key. Yeah. It really.
And it's surprising how many famous books were rejected by scores and scores of publishers. I mean, Charles Dickens in his earlier years received a letter saying, "I'm sorry, Mr. Dickens, it's apparent that you do not have a facility to use the English language," and was rejected. Someone wrote, "Well, who cares about a voyage across the Pacific in a bamboo boat, Kon-Tiki," which became nobody wants to read a book about a diary of a 15-year-old girl, The Diary of Anne Frank.
Right.
All rejected until finally someone said, "Wait a minute, this is something.
This has something.
That has something that I think has value and merit."
There was a book which I'm sure you've heard. It's a series of books now, Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Oh yeah.
Jack Canfield wrote along with Mark Victor Hansen. When they wrote that first book, they were rejected 112 times. I know one of the publishers who rejected, and now it's sold over 1 billion books in their series. And what they did is they sold out of a van. They had enough belief in the book that they went town to town selling books out of a van until eventually they found someone who said, this is a pretty good concept.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite stories is John Kennedy Toole, who wrote a novel called The Confederacy of Clowns in 1958. Spent 11 years trying to get it published, and then in a fit of despondency committed suicide.
Wow.
His mother took up that unfinished published book and spent another 11 years. Finally, the Louisiana State University Press, because he came from New Orleans, just to get her off his back, said, "I'll read it," a professor, and loved it. It was published 1980, 22 years after it was written.
Wow.
11 years after the author, John Kennedy Toole, committed suicide. It became a bestseller and won the Pulitzer Prize for Literature in 1980.
Was it a Confederacy of Dunces? Or
Confederacy
Clowns?
of Dunces, right.
Right. I'm familiar with the book, yeah.
Okay, then, very good, very good.
I didn't know the backstory, but I did know the title.
Yeah, that's a Confederacy of Dunces. So what was the impulse for you to write the world premiere of Me? What kind of got you going, got your blood boiling?
I went and trained in 2008 to become a life success consultant. And during that training, the guy that owns the company, a guy by the name of Bob Proctor, who was featured in a movie called The Secret, he encouraged us to write a book. And this is all power of the positive thinking and visualization and a lot of spirituality involved. The Secret, those type of books. And as a trained consultant, I was all for writing a book. Excuse me, but he said, "You're in harmony with the material. Write a book. You'll get instant credibility. If you want to build a business based on life success consulting and coaching, you're going to have some place to launch it from." And when I thought of writing a book, I kept coming back to the same thing, that I don't have an original spin on positive thought or visualization or all the things that I had studied leading up to 2008. I had been studying personal development books for a dozen years leading up to that training. So instead, I started a newsletter called Our Daily Fred, which featured an excerpt from one of these books, and then my slant on it, which I call my Freditorial. And I started with 17 subscribers. Once a week, I would send them these inspirational thoughts along with my take on it, my Freditorial, and they loved it. And from that point, it's blossomed into several thousand subscribers in several different countries. It goes out Monday through Friday, every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock a.m. to this day. So I've been doing that for 10 years. And during the course of that, writing that engaged me in the writing process. The creating process was so engaging, and the information was so much easier to write about as I talked about a practical application. One of the things that I talk about in the book, one of the themes is visualization. And I've been a practitioner of visualization for many years. And one day I was visualizing, I was by an ocean shore, and there was a bottle coming to shore, and I picked the bottle up, and I saw a note inside, and I took the note out, and the note said, "The world premiere of Me." And I opened my eyes, and I said, that would make a great title for a book. And that was about probably 10 years ago. And a year after that, I started to get little ideas about the world premiere of me. I believe it was delivered through me in little fragments, and that's how the whole thing for this came about really as an inspiration from my coaching business and my newsletter, Our Daily Fred, and then little bits and pieces. Finally, I got to a point where I said, you know, I might have enough for a novel here, and I started writing.
Marvelous, marvelous. Now, you also have experience as a ghostwriter.
Yes.
Tell us about that. How did you get into that?
Well, I had when I trained in Life Success back in 2008, I met a couple of guys who started their own self-publishing company, and they said, "What do you want to do with this business? You know, what is your big picture goal?" I said, "My big picture goal is to just do keynote speeches. You know, not to be coaching individual groups or individuals." And to write. What my desire is to write, to inspire people through my writing. And they said, we have a small self-publishing company, and we offer ghostwriting services. Would you be interested? Do you have to be credited? And I said, absolutely not. I'd like to be paid, but I don't have to be credited. And they said, no, we'll pay you. And so I wrote a couple ghostwriting books, one of which is on ethanol, which is one of the most misconceived things based on the guy that I interviewed in South Dakota, that has not been published because we called out so many politicians and people who have muddied the waters with what ethanol could potentially be. But that was how that happened. And then from there, I was on a writer's website, and someone found my name, and I ghost wrote her book. And eventually I decided, you know, after having written in that capacity, all nonfiction, I got the idea for this novel, and I said, you know, let me put all my efforts into the novel.
The ghostwriter does not get the credit that he deserves.
No.
I remember reading about Margaret Truman, who became an author, writing murder mysteries set in Washington, D.C., in the White House and the Capitol and so on. And it was all ghost written, and they asked her to do a book tour, and she couldn't do it because she didn't know enough about the book. She didn't know enough about the book to talk about it because it had been completely ghost written.
When I tell novices or people, there's lay people about being a ghostwriter, they say, "Oh, have you ever gone to St. Augustine? They do the ghost tours." And I said, "No, it's not ghost as in boo. It's I'm writing it unpublished or uncredited. A lot of times the ghostwriter will get credited, where you'll have How I Dunked the Ball by Michael Jordan, and then fine print at the bottom with Jack Bellello. He wrote the entire book, the guy in the small print.
That's
People
true.
don't understand that.
That's true.
But yeah, they don't get enough credit. There's a lot of work.
There are a couple other things that I found quite interesting. One, that you did stand-up comedy, and also acting in theater, a local theater and so on.
Yep.
How did you get into stand-up comedy, and how successful were you? Because that's a pretty tough gig.
The toughest public speaking you can possibly do. Because if you're there to deliver a speech, okay, people are going to like it or they're not going to like it. That's okay. When you're there to do comedy, you have all eyes in the room on you, and they're all saying, okay, make me laugh. And that is pressure. I get into it in 1983. I was working as a bartender, and Wednesday night was comedy night. And they would bring the comics from Boston up to our club, and we'd pack the club. And looking at them perform, I said, I can do that. I would love to do that. I would love the thrill of getting up there. So the very first, so I asked the owners of the club, do you think I'd be able to go up and do a guest spot? And he said, sure. We'll put you up there, a month from now. So I rehearsed, and I got a whole routine together. And Paula Poundstone, who went on, she was on stage the first night I did it. She was going to be one of the performers. She insisted that I go last, not to be a headliner, but she said, me and the other comic are going to do our thing, and we're going to go back to Boston, and we'll bring your boy up last. And we'll keep the audience here, because if they're here to see him, we don't want them running out as soon as he gets done. So I did it in 1980, I guess it was 1982 or 1983, at a small club in New Hampshire. And it was the most nerve-wracking thing I've ever done. And it was, talk about stepping through fear to do something. That's what I did. I just stepped through my fear. I got up there. And then when I came to Long Island, moved to Long Island, I did it for about a dozen years. The highlight being I opened for a guy named Gabe Kapler.
Oh, sure.
Who was the Welcome Back Kotter.
Welcome Back Kotter, yeah.
And I was funnier than he was, by the way, Jack. That was a big thrill for me. And I stepped back from it just because of other obligations. But I do still do public speaking, and I do use humor. I think that's a great tool for any speaker is to not to be shtick, but to use humor that's the most direct point between two people. And so I do use it, and I use it in my book as well.
Yes, I noticed that, and it's very effective. And I remember reading about the coach from North Carolina State who won the championship, and then he was dying and said there were 3 things we could do every day, and you could apply it to your writing so effectively. If you could laugh every day, if you could cry, think.
Yeah.
Laugh, cry, and think. He
Right.
said, wow, that would be a wonderful way to get on with the business of living.
Life,
And that was
yeah.
Jim Valvano,
Valvano,
who died
of course.
about 20 years ago now.
I remember the speech.
Yeah,
and,
you remember that speech in the ESPN?
He's dead on.
And I remember saying, boy, if an author could communicate that, laugh, cry, and by cry I meant show emotion.
Right, of course.
Don't be afraid to show emotion, and to think about something important, you will get on well with the business of living.
I completely agree, and it's something that I am consciously aware of as I write. I want the information to not just be entertaining. I want people to be engaged to the point where they feel part of that, where the emotion will come out in response to what happens to our hero. I completely agree. I love that.
Now, you mentioned your inspiration, that visualization. Now, you're on the beach, and can you explain visualization in more detail to us? What actually do you think it is?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I would say in response to that is we think in pictures. That's how we're designed. If I say to you, Jack, think of your refrigerator. What happens? Well, a picture of your refrigerator appears on the movie screen of your mind. If I then say to you, Jack, think of Mick Jagger. Okay, now a picture of Mick Jagger comes up. And what's interesting is, although we think in pictures, every one that I say that to will have a different picture. And so when you get into something more abstract, like, what does your ideal life look like? People will kind of go haywire. They'll draw a blank because they never contemplated that. They're living from the outside in. Everything that they think or do or act upon is something that's given to them or requested of them in the job or whatever. When you stop to create and you start saying, what does the image of my ideal life look like? Well, now you're tapping into something. So when I first discovered creative visualization, I used it to do that, to create my ideal life. How does it look? Where am I? Who am I interacting with? What do I look like? What am I doing? And so forth. And so creative visualization can be either a very receptive thing where you listen to music and you just allow whatever images to flow in, or it's something that a specific procedure that you do. There's one creative visualization that I do where I'm sitting in a movie theater and I'm getting into a quiet state of mind. I'm trying to get all other thought out. And then I allow whatever's going to play on the movie screen to just play, and I observe. I never know what it's going to be. And the author of that book, which is Adelaide Bry, she said to have the projection coming out from your forehead onto the screen, and that never worked for me. It was always distracting. So I just let the regular projector project it. But there's a lot of different books on visualization that I've studied, a lot of different techniques, and some are just as simple as just sit there and go to your quiet place, an image of a place you really love and can just be quiet and just see what happens. And the key there is to relax and allow. So if a hippopotamus comes up smoking a cigar and reciting French poetry, just go with it, And I've had more things come up, like this bottle coming to shore. I wasn't